First contact with consequences. Dr. Elena Santos stood at the observation deck of the International Deep Space Research Station, her dark eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the spread of what the galaxy now called the Crimson Blight. Red markers dotted the spiral arms of the Milky Way, each representing another civilization falling to the mysterious disease that turned its victims to crystalline statues. Another rejection from the Centaurian Alliance, her AI assistant Araya reported, its holographic form flickering with what Elena had come to recognize as frustration. That makes 17 advanced civilizations that have refused to help. Elena pressed her hand against the cold, transparent steel window, watching as another refugee ship limped into Earth's solar system. The vessel's hull bore the distinctive scaring of hasty repairs and desperate flight. How many on board? 8,423 Nexarians, Araya responded, mostly children and medical cases. Their homeworld has a projected crystallization date of less than 2 weeks. The door to the observation deck slid open with a soft hiss. Admiral Chen Wei, Earth Defense Forces Chief of Sinological Relations, stepped in. His usually immaculate uniform showed signs of strain, wrinkles that spoke of too many hours in emergency meetings. The Galactic Council just concluded their emergency session, he announced, his voice heavy. They voted to establish a quarantine zone around all affected systems. No aid permitted, no evacuation allowed. They're calling it Containment Protocol 7. Elena's fingers curled into a fist against the window. They're condemning billions to death. The Council claims it's the logical choice, Chen replied, pulling up a data stream with a gesture. Their predictive models show that any intervention increases the risk of spread by 47%. The Arcturians proposed letting the affected worlds run their course to prevent galaxy-wide contamination. And what about the Nexarian children we just took in? Elena demanded. What about the Meridian refugees in Australia, or the Kylaxians in Brazil? Are we supposed to just turn them away? Chen's expression softened. That's why I'm here, Elena. Earth's governments have reached an unanimous decision. We're formally rejecting the Council's containment protocol. Elena turned sharply. What? Humanity is officially declaring our space a sanctuary zone. We're mobilizing everything we have. Colony ships, research stations, private vessels. The entire Sol system is opening its doors. He paused, meeting her gaze. And we're putting you in charge of finding a cure. The Council will never forgive this, Elena whispered, though her mind was already racing with possibilities. They'd need to convert the Mars colonies into quarantine zones, establish new medical research facilities on Europa. Probably not, Chen agreed. The Arcturians are already calling us emotional primitives who'll doom the galaxy with our irrationality. But you know what? I'd rather be an emotional primitive than watch children turn to crystal while we hide behind protocol. Elena pulled up her research notes with a gesture, streams of data flooding the air around her. We'll need to coordinate with the refugee medical teams. Each species has different reactions to the blight. There might be a pattern we're missing. And we should. She stopped, noticing Chen's slight smile. What? The Meridian ambassador said something interesting today, he replied. She said that in all their centuries of space travel, they've never encountered a species quite like us. Other races see a crisis and calculate odds. Humans see suffering and just help. It's called being decent, Elena muttered, already organizing research teams in her mind. It's called being human, Chen corrected. And right now, the galaxy needs a little humanity. Over the next few days, Earth's solar system transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. Ships of every size and description were retrofitted into medical facilities and refugee housing. Private citizens opened their homes to alien families. Research institutions worldwide redirected their focus to understanding the Crimson Blight. The Galactic Council sent increasingly urgent warnings about breach of protocol. Earth's response, drafted by a junior diplomat in Rio, became instantly famous across human space. With all due respect, we don't give a damn about your protocols. We give a damn about lives. Elena worked until she could barely stand, coordinating with alien medical experts, analyzing infection patterns, searching for any weakness in the blight's molecular structure. She kept a hologram running in her lab showing the number of refugees safe in Sol space. It helped, on the harder days, to remember what they were fighting for. Doctor, HFY interrupted her work one evening. You should see this. A new transmission was playing across the screens. More refugee ships, hundreds of them, were approaching Sol. But these weren't carrying victims of the blight. These were ships from unaffected worlds, carrying scientists and doctors and engineers. Message from the lead vessel, HFY announced. We disagree with the Council. We choose to help. Please guide us in. Elena felt tears in her eyes as she watched the ships approach. Perhaps humanity's emotional irrationality was contagious after all. Or perhaps, sometimes, it just took one species willing to break the rules to remind everyone else of who they wanted to be. Guide them in, she ordered, turning back to her work with renewed determination. We've got a galaxy to save. The price of compassion. The Europa Research Complex gleamed like a diamond against the ice moon's surface, its transparent domes housing thousands of researchers from 24 species. Dr. Elena Santos walked through the main laboratory, her breath creating small clouds in the carefully maintained cold environment needed by their Creation researchers. The latest results from Testing Chamber 7, Dr. Catal announced, their crystalline form vibrating with what Elena had learned to recognize as excitement. The Creation scientist had been among the first to break ranks with the Galactic Council, bringing crucial insights into crystalline molecular structures. Elena studied the holographic display, her tired eyes widening. The blight's progression slowed by 42% in this trial. Indeed, Catal's crystals chimed melodiously. The combination of human synthetic proteins and meridian quantum healing shows promise. We would never have considered such a merger of techniques before. Your species' tendency to ignore traditional boundaries between scientific disciplines is refreshing. An alert flashed across Elena's neural interface. Admiral Chen's face appeared in her vision, his expression grim. Elena, we got trouble. The Council's sent a delegation. They're demanding entry to the Sol system. On what grounds? They're claiming we're violating about 50 different quarantine protocols. But that's not the real problem. Chen's image flickered. They got evidence suggesting the blight is adapting to our containment measures. 3 new systems just reported first-stage crystallization. Elena felt her heart sink. The Creations around her must have sensed her distress. Their crystalline forms dimmed in response. How long until they reach Sol? 2 hours. They're led by High Arbiter Extol. You remember them? She did. The Arcturian official had been particularly vocal about humanity's dangerous emotional interference in galactic affairs. Brief me on the way. Catal, can you supervise the next phase of trials? The Creation scientist hummed affirmatively. We will continue. Regardless of the Council's demands, we cannot stop now. The shuttle ride to Earth's orbital diplomatic station gave Elena time to review their progress. 3 months of non-stop research had yielded promising leads, but no cure. Yet the refugee populations were stable, with new treatment protocols managing to slow the blight's progress significantly. The diplomatic station's main chamber had been configured to accommodate the various environmental needs of the Council delegation. Elena stood beside Chen as the Arcturian ships docked, their sleek forms reflecting Earth's light. High Arbiter Extol entered like a storm of shimmering metals, their modulated voice filling the chamber. Dr. Santos, Admiral Chen, you have been formally charged with violation of Galactic Council Quarantine Directive 557B. The penalty is immediate cessation of all aid efforts and surrender of research data. With respect, Arbiter, Elena stepped forward. We decline. The Arcturian surface rippled with patterns that translated to extreme disapproval. This is not a request, Doctor. Your interference has destabilized established containment protocols. The blight spreads because you refuse to let it burn out naturally. Burnout. Chen's voice was quiet but sharp. You mean let it kill everyone it infected. Watch children die while we hide behind protocols. Individual lives are irrelevant compared to galactic stability, Toll declared. We have calculated. Show them, Elena interrupted, gesturing to Araya. The AI projected a massive hologram of the Sol system, highlighting thousands of points of light. Each of these is a survivor. Parents, children, scientists, artists, people you would have sacrificed for your protocols. And this, another gesture brought up research data, is what we've learned by helping them. The blight isn't just a disease. It's evolving, learning. Your containment strategy would have given it time to become unstoppable. These are emotional arguments. No, a new voice rang out. A Meridian scientist Elena knew as first healer Ixel stepped forward from the Earth delegation. These are facts. I've studied the data personally. Humanity's approach, while unorthodox, has given us the first real understanding of the blight's mechanism. Their emotional drive to help others has accomplished more in 3 months than the Council's careful protocols would have in years. Toll's surface swirled with complex patterns. You were among those who agreed to the containment protocols, first healer. I was wrong, Ixel said simply. We were all wrong. We chose safety over compassion, protocol over lives. Humanity showed us another way. Elena brought up more data, showing the latest trial results. The blight adapts by incorporating aspects of its victim's molecular structure. That's why it affects each species differently. But by studying multiple species simultaneously, by working together instead of hiding in isolation, we're learning to predict its mutations. We can get ahead of it. And what of the cost? Toll demanded. The resources you've expended, the risks you've taken. Worth it, Chen said firmly. Every life saved, every piece of knowledge gained. Worth it. That's what you've never understood about humans, Arbiter. We don't calculate the cost when lives are at stake. We act. We help. We find a way. The chamber fell silent. Elena could feel the weight of the moment, the collision of two fundamentally different approaches to crisis. Finally, Toll spoke again, their patterns showing something almost like resignation. The Council has authorized me to implement mandatory quarantine measures if you refuse to comply. Then you should know, Elena replied, that every survivor we've helped, every scientist who joined us, has been granted Earth citizenship if they wanted it. If you quarantine us, you quarantine representatives of 24 Council species. Are you prepared for those diplomatic consequences? More silence. Then, incredibly, Toll's surface showed patterns Elena had never seen before. You planned this. We planned to help people, Chen corrected. Everything else was just human improvisation. Perhaps the Arbiter's patterns shifted again. There is something to be learned from human improvisation. The Council will review its position on intervention protocols. As the delegation departed, Elena felt exhaustion sweep over her, but there was no time to rest. The labs on Europa were waiting, and with them, the next step towards saving the galaxy. You know, Chen said quietly, I think we just changed more than containment protocols today. Elena nodded, thinking of Toll's excitement over unconventional research methods, of Ixel's brave stand against their own council. We showed them something they'd forgotten. Sometimes the most logical choice is to follow your heart. Breaking point. Red emergency lights pulsed through the Europa Research Complex as Dr. Elena Santos stared at the holographic projection with horror. The crystalline formation spreading across Research Chamber 3 wasn't just a containment breach. It was a new strain of the blight, one that could survive in the vacuum of space. Quarantine protocols engaged, Araya announced, its voice unnaturally calm. All personnel in Section 7 have been evacuated. Dr. Toll did not make it out. Elena pressed her hand against the observation window. Beyond it, where her friend and colleague had stood moments before, a beautiful but terrible crystal formation grew, refracting light in impossible ways. "Show me the progression rate." 300% faster than any previously documented strain, Araya reported. The combination of creation biology and our experimental treatments created something new, something worse. Admiral Chen's voice crackled through the emergency channels. "Elena, the Council's monitoring stations just picked up the energy signature. They're convening an emergency session. We need options." "There aren't any," she whispered, watching the crystal growth consume another chamber. "This strain doesn't just survive in space. It thrives on the very elements we use to fight it. Every treatment we developed, every breakthrough we made. It's learning from them all." The complex's warning sirens grew louder as the crystallization approached the main containment barriers. Elena's mind raced through calculations, each worse than the last. If even a fragment of this strain reached Earth's atmosphere. "Admiral," her voice steadied as years of training took over, "initialize Protocol Omega. Immediate evacuation of all research personnel except essential staff. And send the signal." There was a long pause. "Elena, that signal will bring every Council ship in range. They'll quarantine the entire system, everything we'd fought for. Will mean nothing if this strain reaches Earth." She turned away from the window, already moving toward the central lab. "Send it, then get our people out." The next hours passed in a blur of emergency protocols and desperate calculations. Elena worked with the remaining team, human and alien scientists who refused to evacuate, trying to understand this new strain before it was too late. Through it all, she felt the weight of Kittle's absence, the space where their crystalline form should have been chiming with insights and observations. The Council's response came faster than anyone expected. Within 6 hours, a fleet of ships surrounded the Sol system, their weapons trained on predetermined containment points. High Arbiter Angstol's transmission reached Elena in the midst of another failed containment attempt. "Dr. Santos, the Arcturian's pattern showed genuine regret. The Council has reviewed the data. The new strain cannot be allowed to spread. We are prepared to implement final containment protocol." Elena knew what that meant. The destruction of Europa. Of Earth, if necessary. The death of billions to save trillions. It was, by the Council's logic, the only rational choice. "How long?" she asked. "You have 6 hours to evacuate essential personnel. The Council grants this in recognition of humanity's efforts to help." Elena looked around the laboratory, at the human scientists working alongside Meridian energy specialists and Kylaxian quantum theorists, at the shared determination in eyes and sensory organs of all shapes and forms. 6 hours to save everything, or watch it all burn. "Counter-proposal," she said. "Give us 12 hours, not to evacuate, to finish our work." "Doctor, the risk is already maximum," she interrupted. "You can't make it worse by giving us half a day, but we might make it better." She took a deep breath. "You've seen what humans do when backed into a corner. Give us these hours, and if we fail, I'll give the order to initiate containment myself." The Arcturian surface swirled with complex calculations. The Council's models show a success probability of less than 0.01%. "Then you have nothing to lose by letting us try. And if there's one thing you should have learned about humans by now, Arbiter, we specialize in beating impossible odds." After what felt like an eternity, Angstol's patterns shifted. 12 hours, Doctor. Not 1 minute more." Elena turned to her team, seeing her own desperate determination reflected back from dozens of faces and forms. "All right. We've got 12 hours to solve the impossible, so let's do what humans do best. Ignore the odds and make the impossible happen." They worked like never before, human intuition combining with alien knowledge in ways that defied conventional scientific methods. Every failure taught them something new. Every setback pushed them to try more radical approaches. The hours ticked by with agonizing speed. In hour 11, as hope began to fade, A young Meridian researcher noticed something in the latest failed test. The crystals weren't growing quite as fast. Alina felt her exhausted mind spark with possibility. "Show me the molecular structure." The holographic display exploded with data. And there, in the chaos of failure, she saw it. The pattern they'd all missed. The flaw in their approach that had been staring at them all along. "We've been trying to stop it," she whispered. "But we can't stop it. It learns from every attempt. So we don't stop it. We redirect it. HFY, begin new simulation series, incorporating Kylaxian phase theory with meridian energy patterns. And add Kittle's original crystalline resonance research." As the final hour of their deadline approached, Alina stared at the results with a mixture of exhaustion and wild hope. It wasn't a cure. It wasn't even really a solution. But it was something uniquely human. A crazy, desperate plan that just might work. She opened a channel to the Council fleet. "Arbiter Engstol, I need you to patch me through to every ship in range. And I need you to trust humanity one more time." The Arcturian's response held something that might have been amusement. "After all this time, Doctor, I've learned that trying to stop humans from attempting the impossible is itself impossible. You have your channel. Make it count." The human solution. The blight isn't just a disease. Alina's voice rang out across thousands of ships surrounding the Sol system. It's an intelligence. Every time we fight it, it learns, adapts, evolves. But we've been so focused on destroying it that we missed something fundamental. It wants to survive. Just like us. She gestured, and HFY projected the latest simulation results to every vessel in range. "We can't kill it, but we can give it somewhere else to grow. Something else to become." The data streams showed crystalline structures forming and reforming in complex patterns. Patterns that looked eerily similar to the computing crystals used in most advanced galactic technology. "Dr. Santos," High Arbiter Engstol's voice carried equal parts interest and skepticism. "Are you suggesting we negotiate with a plague?" "No," Alina smiled tiredly. "I'm suggesting we redirect it. The blight transforms organic matter into crystalline structures because that's how it reproduces. But what if we give it a better option? A purpose that doesn't require destroying life?" She brought up Kittle's final research notes. "My friend discovered something before we lost them. The blight doesn't just convert matter. It preserves information. Every crystalline structure contains encoded data from what it consumed. We thought it was random, but it's not. It's learning. Remembering." Admiral Chen's voice cut in. "Alina, what exactly are you proposing?" "We builded a home," she said simply. "A massive crystalline matrix in deep space, far from any inhabited systems. We seed it with basic computing protocols and let it grow there instead of in living tissue. The blight isn't evil. It's just following its programming to survive and expand. So we give it somewhere to do that safely." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Engstol spoke again, their patterns showing complex calculations. "The energy requirements for such a structure would be astronomical. The engineering challenges alone are exactly why we need every ship here," Alina interrupted. "Each vessel's computing crystals can act as a seed point. Together, they'll create a lattice large enough to attract the blight. It's drawn to crystalline structures already. We just need to make one big enough to be irresistible." More silence. Then, from an unexpected source, support came. A Kylaxian quantum theorist's melodic voice filled the channels. "The human's theory is sound. Our calculations show a 67% probability of success, far higher than any previous attempt to combat the blight." "And if it fails?" someone asked. "Then you're no worse off than you are now," Alina replied. "The containment fleet is already in position. But if it works, we save Earth, the refugees, and maybe turn a galaxy-wide plague into something beneficial." She could almost feel the calculations and debates happening across thousands of ships. The logical species weighing probabilities, the emotional ones considering implications. Finally, Admiral Chen spoke. Earth supports this plan. All human vessels are prepared to contribute their computing crystals to the matrix. One by one, other species joined in. The Meridians, then the Kylaxians. Even a group of young Arcturians broke ranks to offer their support. Within an hour, over 3,000 ships had committed to the attempt. The engineering challenges were immense. Converting thousands of different computing systems into a coherent matrix tested the limits of every species' technical expertise. Humans worked alongside aliens they'd never met before, solving problems no one had ever encountered. Elena coordinated from the Europa facility, watching through observation windows as the crystal matrix took shape in space. It was beautiful. A massive lattice of light and information, growing between the assembled ships like an artificial constellation. Matrix reaching critical mass, Araya announced. Blight detection systems showing response. It's working, Doctor. The strain is being drawn to the structure. On every screen, in every ship, they watched as the deadly crystals began to flow from Europa's surface toward the waiting matrix. The blight moved like liquid light, drawn inexorably toward the larger crystalline structure. Energy patterns are stable, the Kylaxian scientist reported. Information preservation at 99.9%. It's not just moving, it's integrating. Hours passed as the blight transferred itself completely into the matrix. Engineers and scientists monitored every fluctuation, ready to trigger emergency protocols at the first sign of trouble. But the process continued smoothly, the matrix growing more complex and beautiful with each passing moment. Finally, Araya confirmed what their eyes told them. Transfer complete. No trace of the blight remains in organic systems. The matrix it's becoming something else. Elena stared at the massive structure now floating in space. It pulsed with internal light, patterns flowing across its surface in ways that reminded her of thought processes. "What are you?" she whispered. As if in answer, the matrix began to emit complex data streams. The Kylaxian scientist's voice rose with excitement. "It's not random. These are research results, medical data. The matrix is processing everything the blight learned from every species it encountered, but reorganized, refined. It's helping us," Elena realized. All that medical knowledge it absorbed, all those different biological systems it studied, it's showing us how they work together. The council ships moved closer, their sensors recording the unprecedented event. High Arbiter Angstol's pattern showed something very much like wonder. "You didn't just redirect the blight, Doctor. You transformed it. From a force of destruction into a force for healing," Elena finished. She thought of Kutul, of all those lost to the blight. Perhaps this was a fitting memorial. Their knowledge preserved and shared, their deaths transformed into a source of new understanding. Admiral Chen's hand rested on her shoulder. "Only humans," he said quietly, "would look at a galaxy-wide plague and think, how can we help it become something better?" Elena watched the matrix pulse with new discoveries, new possibilities. "That's the thing about humans," she replied. "We don't just survive crises, we learn from them. And we always try to leave things better than we found them, even if things happens to be a crystalline plague trying to destroy the galaxy." The matrix continued its work, casting its light across the assembled ships of a now united galaxy. In the end, humanity's greatest contribution hadn't been finding a cure. It had been finding a way to transform an enemy into an ally, a plague into a gift. It was, perhaps, the most human solution of all. Legacy of the Angry Apes. 5 years after the Blight Crisis, the Europa Research Complex had tripled in size. The crystalline matrix, now known as the Guardian Archive, floated serenely in deep space, continuously broadcasting medical and scientific discoveries that had revolutionized healing across the galaxy. Dr. Elena Santos stood in her old laboratory, now a historical site, preparing for yet another delegation of alien scientists. "The Arcturian Science Academy's representatives have arrived," Araya announced. and Dr. Ktal's successor has requested permission to join the tour. Elena smiled, touching the small crystal pendant she wore, a fragment of her friend's final form, preserved as a reminder. Of course, they're always welcome here. The laboratory's door slid open, admitting a group of shimmering Arcturians, led by none other than High Arbiter Angstol. Their surface patterns showed what Elena had learned to recognize as wry amusement. Still giving tours, Doctor? One might think the head of the Galactic Medical Division would delegate such tasks. Some stories need to be told in person, Elena replied. She gestured to the observation window where Earth glowed blue and beautiful in the distance. Besides, I find it helpful to remember where we started. The young Creation scientist who had succeeded Kittel chimed softly. We all remember. The day humanity taught the galaxy that logic without compassion is merely calculation. Angstol's patterns shifted thoughtfully. Indeed, though I suspect many of us are still struggling to understand how your species knew it would work, the probabilities were irrelevant. Elena interrupted gently. We didn't know it would work. We hoped. Sometimes that's enough. She led them through the complex, past laboratories where humans worked alongside aliens, past memorial walls honoring those lost to the Blight, past windows showing the massive medical research stations that now orbited Europa. The facility had become more than a research center. It was a symbol of what could be accomplished when species worked together. The Guardian Archive sent another data packet this morning, Elena mentioned as they walked. It's developed a potential cure for meridian temporal fever. The Blight's understanding of crystalline structures, combined with its accumulated biological knowledge, continues to surprise us. An entity that once threatened to destroy the galaxy now works to heal it, the young Creation observed. A very human transformation. They reached the central atrium, where a holographic display showed the Guardian Archive's latest activities. The massive crystalline structure had grown more beautiful over the years, its complex patterns reflecting the incredible amount of information it processed and shared. The Council has been discussing humanity's role in galactic affairs, Angstol said carefully. Their patterns showed diplomatic formality. Many feel it is time to offer Earth a permanent seat on the High Council. Elena raised an eyebrow. I thought we were too emotional and unpredictable for such responsibility. You are. Angstol's patterns flickered with what might have been humor. But perhaps that is exactly what the galaxy needs. Your species sees possibilities where we see only problems. You act when we would calculate. You hope when logic dictates despair. We call that being human. Admiral Chen's voice came from behind them. He had aged in the past 5 years, his hair now streaked with gray, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Sorry I'm late. Had to finish a call with the Kylaxian Defense Force. They're requesting human advisors for their crisis response teams. Another species recognizing the value of human perspective. The Creation chimed. It is becoming quite common. Elena looked around at the facility she had helped build, at the aliens who had become colleagues and friends, at the evidence of cooperation and progress that surrounded them. You know what the funny thing is. We never set out to change galactic politics or prove humanity's worth. We just couldn't stand by and watch people suffer when we might be able to help. That, Angstol observed, is precisely why you succeeded where our careful plans failed. You acted from, what is your word? Heart. Heart, Chen confirmed. Though I seem to recall you once called it dangerous emotional interference. The Arcturians' patterns showed complex emotions. I was wrong. We were all wrong. The galaxy needed your emotional interference. It needed your anger at injustice, your refusal to accept the impossible, your irrational hope in the face of overwhelming odds. They reached the memorial wall where Kittel's name shimmered alongside others lost to the Blight. Elena touched her crystal pendant again, remembering her friend's excitement about unconventional research methods. The Council's official history now refers to this period as the Awakening, Angstol continued, the time when humanity taught the galaxy to feel again. We didn't teach anyone anything. Elena protested. We just did what we had to do. Exactly, the young Creosian chimed. You showed us that sometimes one must simply act, regardless of calculations and probabilities. That emotion and logic need not be enemies. That the most rational choice can be to follow one's heart. Through the window, they could see ships arriving from dozens of worlds. Scientists, students, diplomats, all coming to learn and work together. The Guardian Archive's light pulsed in the distance, a constant reminder of how humanity's compassion had transformed a crisis into a gift. So, Chen smiled, what's next for humanity's emotional interference in galactic affairs? Elena looked at the stars beyond the window, at the endless possibilities they represented. There's always another problem to solve, another crisis that needs a human perspective. And as long as there are people who need help, human or alien, we'll be there. With your impossible solutions and irrational hope, Angstol added, their patterns showing genuine warmth. Of course, Elena agreed. After all, that's what humans do best. We see the impossible and think, why not? We look at problems and see possibilities. And sometimes, just sometimes, our crazy ideas change the galaxy. The Guardian Archive's light seemed to pulse in agreement, its crystalline surface reflecting the combined knowledge and hope of 1,000 species. In the end, humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy hadn't been technology or military might, or even scientific advancement. It had been something far simpler and far more profound. The courage to care, the strength to act, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the most logical choice is to listen to your heart. The legacy of the angry apes, as some species had once called humans, turned out to be not anger at all, but rather the fierce compassion that anger had masked. And across the galaxy, species were learning that perhaps a little human irrationality was exactly what the universe needed.